I'm the project officer for Kiewa Catchment Land Care Groups. We've got Shannon Brennan here, the Kiewa Catchment facilitator. And then we've got David Hardwick, our guest speaker tonight. So I just wanted to start off just by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which you are meeting today and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. And also like to acknowledge the contribution Aboriginal groups have made to land care. So this is our final session for an introductory Kiewa Valley Carbon Bash. We've had 3 face-to-face sessions, which we've been real lucky to have. And this is our final one today, obviously online. It's been a real great kind of interest in soil carbon farming, just being generated from these sessions. So real happy to have you along tonight. The Kiewa Catchment Land Care Network is pretty grateful that our grant application last year that we submitted to the federal government that was funded by the Future Drought Fund was successful and allowed us to basically provide this opportunity to deliver this great project we got over the next few months. So it's going to be a pretty exciting concept. We're going to have a couple of different trial demonstration farms, and we've got Jess Brain, who's on tonight, who's one of the demonstration farms, and we'll talk a bit about them later on. But it's just really an opportunity to kind of teach people, having different workshops on farm and a couple of information sessions with some carbon traders later on in the year, and then a big wrap up, kind of just giving people a bit more information, just kind of demystifying the whole thing about soil carbon and all the different methods of farming that can help, kind of help create more carbon if it's towards carbon credits or towards just having better organic minerals in your soil. So we're lucky here today to have David Hardwick from Soil Land Food, who's based in Albury. He's going to be the main lead and assist us doing the delivery of the project. So Dave's an agroecologist with over 20 years experience in the agricultural sector. He's got wide experience in sustainable regenerative agriculture. So Dave's worked on many projects and we're real happy to have him along tonight. So welcome, Dave, and enjoy, everyone.
Thanks, Charles. G'day, everyone. I'll just share my screen before we launch into it, so bear with me a minute. Hopefully you guys can see, can you guys see the presentation screen there? Yep, great, thanks, Jess. Okay, so as Charles mentioned, this project is called the Kiewa Catchment Land Care Carbon Bash, where we're going to make millions of dollars for everyone in the valley growing and selling carbon. No, I'm just kidding. You're going to make millions of dollars for other people, your farmers. You don't make millions of dollars for yourself. No, I'm just stirring everyone up. All right, so let's get into it. So what is it? This is just a bit of an info session, really. We had 3 face-to-face ones, as Charles mentioned, at different pubs across the valley. This is just, again, just giving you a bit of an insight into what we're intending to do, so you can see, if it's something you want to get involved with. We're hoping that you'll come along to at least 1 or 2 of the face-to-face workshops. And I guess the 2 key things from the project is exploring the potential for soil carbon projects in the Kiewa Valley if you're a landholder. So what are the potential for me as a landholder to do a soil carbon project? The second thing is just learning about the process for starting a soil carbon project. So we're going to go through over the 6 months the ins and outs of carbon farming projects. And the third thing that the project will do is give us a chance to explore soil carbon and soil health in more general terms, soil biology, all of those aspects of the soil that actually will help you as a farmer, a grazier, or a landholder anyway, even if you're not going to get paid for carbon or you're not interested in all the paperwork that it would involve. And there's already mountains of paperwork. So I guess what's driving the interest in all this carbon space? And I guess the answer to that is that the government, through the wisdom of its market-based approaches, is creating an environmental product that can be produced, sold and bought. So here's Soils Auctions Plus, where people are bidding on different topsoils and they can put their bids in and buy these topsoils instead of using a real estate agent, you can get an agronomist to help you buy the property. So no, I'm just kidding. These are just people looking at soils. But basically, you're turning soil carbon into a product. When the government's cooked up this scheme, it's been designed by environmental economists. If anyone knows who they are, they're really good at complicating the world. But we know what they're trying to do. They're trying to create something, a market-based approach to helping solve obviously some serious environmental issues. So yeah, it's basically carbon is, if you think about it, an environmental product. So the thing just to be mindful of with environmental products like soil carbon is that you need a landscape to be in the market. So because environmental products are created by ecosystems. So it's exactly the same as if you're growing wool or dairy, milk or red meat or vegetables or tree crops like hazelnuts. You actually need a landscape. So you need soils, water, vegetation, sunlight, climate, terrain. You need all these things to grow an agricultural product, if you like. And it's the same for environmental products. They need a landscape. So as owners and managers of landscapes, primary producers like yourselves can be part of this new market. You don't only have to produce and sell agricultural products. There's opportunities now to sell environmental products, to grow and sell by environment. And that includes biodiversity as well, which we don't focus on a lot in this project, but we'll probably bring it in at some point because it is a potential add-on. And so therefore, if you're a landholder or a farmer and grazier, or you just own land, then you're in a strategically competitive position in this emerging market. You have the chance to be in the box seat because you own land and you manage landscapes. And so the last thing to remember about environmental products is that when products are being bought and sold, then you can guarantee that traders will get in on the action. They will definitely want a piece of the action. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of carbon companies come into the marketplace for various motivations. But yeah, trading of the carbon product is obviously a key motivator. So just a quick summary of the two types of carbon environmental products that are out there. You've got above ground products, which the two types within that is vegetation, so planting trees and shrubs and then getting paid for the carbon that's stored in them as they grow. But the other one is reducing emissions. So if you can eat more seaweed and therefore reduce the gas generated by the family around the kitchen table, then the government might actually pay you for that carbon that you're reducing, or the emissions, in this case methane, which is another form of carbon. So yeah, there are two different kind of above ground carbon environmental products emerging, if you like. And then there is the below ground story. So and that's what we call the soil carbon, which is really what this Kiewa Carbon Bash is focusing in on. And so I just thought I'd do, just for a brief 10 minutes, just go through carbon 101, as in where does carbon come from when it comes into the soil? What does it do? How does it hang around? How do we lose it and gain it, etc.? And I just thought I'd show you guys this picture here. This is up near Lankeys Creek. If you know where Lankeys Creek is, it's sort of east of Holbrook, going back the back way around to Corryong. And it's a really interesting picture because there's a bit of gully erosion, as you can see. But if you have a look really carefully, you can see, if I get the squiggly doodah going, if I can do that, hang on a minute. I'll just see if I can get my squiggly doodah to go. Yeah, can everyone see this layer that's formed in the soil below that yellow line there? And so this is a really high organic matter layer down here. It's probably a swamp soil. And then can everyone see that reddish brown layer above it? So it's possible that that layer formed since European settlement. It's not 100% sure. We've got to do a little bit more of analysis on this site. But you can just see it's a good example. If it has, then we call this a post-settlement alluvium. And this layer under here, which was formed in a more stable landscape, is, you can see, really high in organic matter, and we're going to send it off for a test soon next time I'm out there. That's a really just unusual little profile to show you, but it sort of demonstrates that carbon forms in topsoils in different ways. And in this case, often these high swamp soils, you could call them, they're quite peaty. They're formed under very stable conditions, so low erosion regimes in the landscape. Over quite a long period of time, by a lot of vegetation and silt building up and things like that. So yeah, that's obviously formed in a different time than the soil above it. But so how do we get to that, and how does it build up and not sort of disappear? Well, the first thing about carbon is where does it come from? And basically it starts off coming in from plant biomass. So here's a multi-species pasture, not far out of Albury, I think. And the key thing is that as plants grow, they photosynthesize. And as they photosynthesize, they bring in from the air, I don't know, someone just coughed there, sorry about that. They bring in from the air carbon. So that process of photosynthesis is where plants bring in carbon from the air. At the same time that these plants are growing, they are actually taking up from the soil nutrients, so nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, calcium, zinc, etc. So we just say they're bringing up nutrients, or just use it a little NUT. Nutrients, not nuts as in peanuts. And you can see I can't write anyway. I can't write properly with a pen, let alone with this squiggly doodah on Zoom. But can everyone see that you've got carbon plus nutrients being formed in that plant biomass? So that's really what plants do. As plants grow, they photosynthesize, they bring carbon in from the air, and they bring nutrients up from the soil, and they combine them and create what we call plant biomass. And all the rest of us on Earth rely on that plant biomass, because we usually have to either eat it or eat things that eat it, depending if you're a vegetarian, vegan, or just an omnivore or a carnivore. And so the other part of the plant biomass, which is sometimes neglected or we forget about, is what's going on underground. And here's some young plants out near Hay not long ago, and actually growing in a trailer full of sand, believe it or not, just straight sand. And we threw some cover crop seeds in there and let the rain fall on it. And you can see that the plant is building a lot of biomass underground in the form of root volume. So plants are building carbon or soil carbon-based material, either on top of the ground and underneath the ground. And both of them are really important in the soil carbon story. Both the above ground and the below ground are really important. So that's our plant biomass, which is the first step, if you like, of the carbon story. Photosynthesis, creating plant biomass, which is carbon from the air through photosynthesis, and nutrients taken up by the plant through its roots. And so what happens to all that biomass is, over time, a fair amount of it gets fed to the soil. So over time, some of the organic plant material or the biomass ends up as litter or trash on the surface of the soil, so from the top down, and some of it gets fed to the soil as roots die off. So as roots die off, they feed the soil organic biomass. And as soon as a bit of plant material leaves the plant and hits the soil, we call it soil organic matter. So whether it's coming from the top as leaf fall or litter, or just a little bit of mulch from grasses, or it's coming from roots dying off, as soon as it leaves the plant, it's actually now part of the soil organic matter. Remembering that that soil organic matter contains carbon plus nutrients. So this is the key thing. It's carbon plus these nuts. So these guys are what make up soil organic matter. And if you have a look at this photo here, I just thought I'd show you this because it's an interesting trial out of the US. This is 3 grasses cut at different lengths. So you can see here that this one, they've cut it to 2 inches every week. Sorry, they're Americans, so they're not in the decimal era yet, but they cut it to 2 inches every week. This one's cut to 2 inches every 2 weeks, and this one's cut to 2 inches every 4 weeks. So you can see the influence that that has on the plants. So the first thing is that when I cut it to 2 inches every week, the grass has much less opportunity to build solar panels to bring in more carbon. So there's less solar panels over the 12 months because it's been cut all the time. So it's a little bit like overgrazing too intensely. The second effect of that first one is that the plant has less chance to put some of that carbon into building a root system. So you can see very clearly there's much less developed root system. And what that means for soil carbon dynamics is there's actually much less biomass above ground, but particularly below ground, overall developing over the 12 months. If you have a look over on this side, you've got a grass cut to 2 inches every 4 weeks. And because the plant has more time for recovery between cutting or grazing events, it builds a lot more biomass that way, but really more importantly, it builds a lot more root volume that way. And that means that the contribution of the plant, the carbon contribution from the plant to the soil over time is a lot greater. So it's a bit of a balancing act, because obviously you do want to graze that. If you're a grazer, you want to allow the animal to graze it to get some of that plant material. But if you allow recovery, what you can see the effect it will have on the soil organic matter story. So this is sort of where we're going, is the effect of on managing your plants on soil carbon. So when you think about it, the plant has created this biomass, either above ground stuff or below ground stuff. And what happens is that most of that material that gets fed to the soil gets decomposed. So there's millions of microbes and thousands of insects in the soil, including earthworms, or earthworms are an invertebrate related to insects. There's tons of stuff in the soil, and all they like to do is decompose dead plant material or soil organic matter, whether it's litter on the surface or root volume underneath that's been shed off. And so as things decompose, they eat the carbohydrates that the plants have made. And generally, just like us, they breathe it out as CO2. So if you think about the last time you had a bowl of carbs, so unless you're following Pete Evans really strictly, you probably ate carbs sometime today. And the most of the carbohydrate in that bowl of food you had, whether it's pasta or bread or rice or whatever, most of the carbon in that you've breathed out as CO2. Because remember, every minute that you breathe in oxygen, you also breathe out CO2. So the same thing's going on in the soil. So as all the life in the soil is decomposing this plant material, it actually, a lot of the carbon in that soil organic matter that contains carbon has gone back in the air as respiration. And if you have a look at these two soils here, which are 50 centimeters apart, this is actually a permanent bed on this side of a vanilla crop in North Queensland, which has an organic carbon percentage of 16%. And over here in the interrow, it's probably about 3 to 4% maximum. And the amount of carbon there's more carbon being put in here because they mulch it regularly. But two, the respiration rate is quite high. We're in the tropics. So a lot of the carbon that comes into these soils is going back out of the soils. And particularly over here where it's not shaded, there'll be more respiration going on than over here, which is actually shaded and cooled down. But respiration is a natural process. And what it means is that as that organic matter breaks down, the carbon in it ends up back as a gas in the atmosphere. That is a natural process. But the other thing that happens to some of your carbon is that instead of going up as a gas back in the air, some of it kind of transforms, and I'll just give you the technical biochemical pathway of humus, and turns in from organic matter to this really stable stuff that's really dark, which we call humus. So you can see on the right-hand side here in this vanilla bed, the organic matter a lot of the organic matter has transformed into a more stable form of carbon and hasn't disappeared from into the atmosphere through respiration. And it's now what we call humus, or the long-term soil carbon. And that's a really important process. The government, the bureaucratic name for that is sequestration. So if you're wondering what that means, it just means stabilizing carbon in long-term forms in the soil. And if you really want to get your head around humus, you just have to think of compost. So compost starts as a pile of organic matter, and after 3 months or whatever, it shrunk a lot because a lot of the CO2, the carbon has gone up as CO2 as everything ate it. But whatever's left has been transformed and is stable. And humus is really important because it helps with water holding capacity, nutrient exchange, plant biological environment for plants. It helps with a whole lot of reasons, but it is also the form of long-term carbon that can help us keep it out of the atmosphere. So that's really what we're after. We're after trying to build up this fraction as opposed to the respiration fraction, although you need both. So in a nutshell, soil organic carbon, the organic carbon in the soil, is a balance between respiration and humification. And if we have a look at this shot here of the valley, there's different vegetation and different management right across this valley. So, and in an intensely managed pasture, for example, where I put on a lot of fertilizers, for example, particularly nitrogen fertilizer, I might stimulate respiration and tillage will do that too. Whereas if I have an area that's mainly just trees and a lot of woody vegetation and it's not disturbed, I might actually encourage humus formation. However, even in a pasture, you can build your humus levels up and increase the carbon going that way through changing management. And that's really what soil carbon projects are all about, implementing some different management practices to try and minimize respiration and maximize the carbon that's going to form humus. So we don't want to completely stop respiration, and in fact you can't, it's impossible. But we can just slow it down a bit and get more of our carbon to go into the soil. But before we do that, we have to have more plant biomass. So we have to grow more plant biomass, and then two, we have to make sure more of it ends up as humus. So it's kind of like a two-stage process, if that makes sense. So grazing management, for example, is a really powerful tool in this process. There's three other factors. There's a couple of factors that influence it, and that is temperature, rainfall, or moisture. So lower areas of the landscape that have moisture for longer tend to grow more plants and therefore have more carbon. And soil texture. So if you have a soil that's full of clay or has more clay than another soil nearby, the soil with clay in it usually will hold more carbon, everything else being equal. So there are some environmental factors, but there are, of course, obviously the key management and landscape factors of vegetation, the types of vegetation, and how you manage that vegetation is really critical. As you can see from that vanilla soil example, the soils are 50 centimeters apart and one's got like 4 times the carbon. And that's partly because there's more organic matter being applied to it and partly because of the change in management. So these are the kind of influences we have. And I just want to show you guys another handout, if I got it right. Hopefully you guys can see that. This is just 5 different soil carbons from across the northeast Victoria. I've also put some other numbers on there, but if you just have a look at that first one is at Myrtleford. It's an old tobacco field on the river flats, and it's got a 3.3% carbon. Beechworth, quite sandy, granity soil at the top, and Beechworth, 2.7. These are all agricultural paddocks, by the way. Dedarang on the flats, dairy paddock, sort of to the lower end of the valley, lower part of the landscape, 2.8. And then Tallangatta up the valley, 4.8, sort of mid-slope, and Yakandanda out of town being hammered by deer. Very short pastures, not probably grazed well, just because the deer are really hungry. So you can see that carbon varies right across the area, and it varies depending a lot on soil type and management. And just to give you some perspective, here's some Northern Territory soils near Katherine. These are agricultural paddocks, by the way. You can see there it's 0.48. Obviously, very different soil type, very low fertility, ancient landscape, but also very hot and intensive management as well. So very, very low carbon. Here's another one from North Queensland in the wet, dry tropics, so savanna country, but it's a hay production paddock. You can see it's really low. There's that vanilla field I was talking about. And here's a grazing paddock from the Northern Tablelands of New South Wales. And Western Australia, a cropping paddock, as some people might know. Western Australia's got some areas of really low fertility, what they call gutless sands. And there's the carbon level in one of those in a farmed paddock. So you can see that carbon varies across the landscape, and I can build carbon in a pasture with my management, and I can reduce carbon in a pasture with my management. Perennial grasses and pastures actually have a lot of potential to build and store soil carbon, usually because of the root volume of the perennial grasses, whereas forests, the carbon tends to come in from the top. So the canopy fall of leaves and twigs and seeds tends to build up the carbon level from the top down. So you've kind of got this top down in forests and this bottom up root volume from perennial pastures or grasslands. But both of them can build soil carbon, both types of landscapes, if that makes sense. So that's really a really brief Carbon 101, and sorry we're not face to face and we could have a bit of fun with Minties and a few things, but without having said that, hopefully that's made sense a little bit. But I'd just like to sort of jump now across to soil carbon products. So obviously we're trying to grow carbon just like we try and grow trees or pastures or animals. We're trying to grow carbon And I guess this is just some things to think about. So the government has created, well, not just the government, but the government has created through legislation a market for carbon and a demand for that terrestrial carbon. But also there is societal influences. So there are private organizations buying carbon just because they want to buy carbon and feel hormonal about it. So it's not just government regulations, it's also being done through the private sector initiative to try and help improve the planet. But what's happened in Australia is the government system has created an environmental product called an ACCU, and you can probably guess what that stands for. And then you've got market regulations that are there to kind of control that market. So that includes pricing, selling, but also how you grow the carbon. And those things are outlined in what's called the Carbon Methodology 2018. They're the specific ways that you have to grow the carbon in Australia. And then there's a trading platform where you can buy and sell carbon. So these are all kind of parts of the soil carbon market, if you like, that's been created. And the main one we're worrying about, of course, is in the paddock. How do you actually grow carbon? But we're definitely going to talk also about, well, okay, when I grow carbon, how can I sell it? There's just some things to remember when producing and selling soil carbon, like in many of the other environmental products. They're not infinite. So you can grow up to a certain amount of soil carbon, and then usually there's a fixed production duration. So in the case of the Australian system, there's a 10-year process. And the other thing to remember is that unlike most other primary production products like wool and milk and meat, etc., they are not renewable in the short term. So when you grow vegetables, for example, you sell them and then you can grow some more. Or where you grow meat, you fatten the animal up for 18 months or 2 years and then you sell the meat. Then you can grow some more animals. But environmental products, and particularly soil carbon, they are not renewable in the short term. They are long term. So they are like growing trees for forestry. They are 30, 50-year product cycles. So that's a really big difference if you're a primary producer to get your head around. The other thing is that these products have ecological limits. There's only so much carbon you can grow in a landscape and do agriculture. But even if you stop agriculture, there's still only so much because climate, temperature, and rainfall will then influence things. Unless you buy more land, there is a ceiling, if you like, just like any other primary production product in a way. So there's the other thing to remember is that there's risks to production. So, like climatic, like drought or storms or fire, these things, or someone coming on and ploughing all your paddocks while you're away. All of these things are risks to growing carbon. And this risk is long-term, except for forestry, everything else is short-term. Like if you grow a wheat crop and it fails, yep, you have a failure and it can be really devastating economically, but it's a 12-month risk. Whereas the risk to these products is long-term. And the final thing, which is a little bit weird and you've got to get your head around it, is that if you grow carbon and then you sell it, the reality is you then have to keep it on your farm for whoever bought it. So you've sold it and now they own it, and they could be a European superannuation fund for all you know, sitting in Brussels, but they own it, but it's still sitting on your farm in the Kiewa Valley. So this is very different than almost all other agriculture, where once you sold something, it leaves your property. When you sell carbon, when you grow carbon and then sell it, it's still on your farm and you have an obligation to maintain it. So if you sell it, you'll then have to become self-storage and look after it for whoever bought it. So this is very different than all other forms of primary production. Once you sell it, you actually still have to look after it. And the problem with carbon, as I've mentioned, is part of a landscape, and landscapes are not static. So it's not like Fort Knox and you get your gold and then you just lock it away and no one sees it. Carbon will still keep moving through the landscape because landscapes are dynamic. So it is a challenge to maintain it once you've grown it. So this is a very important aspect of the soil carbon market that it needs to be considered. the final couple of things, there are limited opportunities for value adding at the moment. So carbon is pretty much a commodity type of product. So the more you grow, the more your money you'll make. It's a bit like wheat or whatever, you know, you just have to grow volume to make money. So at the moment, we can't value add it as easily. Maybe in the future, there will be some value adding options for it. Like you could have certified organic carbon grown, homegrown in the Kiewa Valley, and the carbon's been fed like pasture fed 100% or something. But at the moment, it's just a standard product. And there are opportunities for stacking things like biodiversity or trees carbon on top of the soil carbon. That's emerging too. And remember that when you engage with companies that want to help you grow carbon and want to trade carbon, they will always try and buy low and sell high. So you just need to be mindful of that. So if they're in the market trading, they will always try and trade buy it low. And if someone's selling it for you on your behalf as a broker, they should always try and get the highest price for you, not for them. And so I guess here are some questions, and I'm sure you guys will have some questions, or hopefully you've got a few questions, but I put a few up that I know have popped up sort of in the last few months. Do you have the opportunity to produce an environmental product on your place? Sorry, Raphael, would you mind just muting yourself, mate? Because I get thrown out big time by background noise. So if you wouldn't mind just hitting your mute, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
So okay. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Thanks very much, Raphael. Yeah, it's just that I have a hearing problem. So when I get background noise, it completely throws me. Thanks for that. So I guess, yeah, the opportunities come down to what is the break-even point, and that's all about how much you can grow, i.e. how big your property is and how much potential carbon you can grow, and the quality, you know, can I increase the humus? So it's just like agriculture, really. You know, if you're growing sheep or milk, you've got to have a certain volume to make it pay worthwhile. You know, it'll make enough money for me. Will it be a viable enterprise? Can I make a profit? If it's something you're going into for profit, you may only just be interested in it to help the environment. That's fine. But if you are thinking about it as an extra enterprise, then, you know, obviously you have to think about it as a business. And then the next question is to ask yourself, do you need help to produce the product? Do you need like an agronomist, if you like, or a carbonomist? I don't know what you're supposed to call them, a consultant or a technical logistical support. And that's often what the carbon companies are providing, not all of them. There are risks to production, as I've mentioned, bushfires. You grow it for 10 years and then you've got to store it for another 15 at least. So who manages that risk? If I sell it and then a bushfire wipes it all out, do I carry the can? Does someone else carry the can, etc.? There are costs to growing carbon. You have to measure it. There's quite a few different costs. The production cycle is long term, obviously. So you've got to think a bit differently. I like to say you've got to think like a forester. And how do you make sense of all the regulations and stuff? Well, that's exactly what this project's all about, helping you to demystify the process and pull apart everything. So hopefully you have a really good understanding at the end of it. And just when you're thinking to sell carbon products or soil carbon, you've got to ask yourself, where are the markets? Like there's a government market and already there's a private market. And there, can you sell it yourself, or do I need to get a broker? How do I get the best price? What are the commissions and all the rest of it? What happens if I sell my land? What happens to the carbon? And what happens if it disappears because of a drought or some other major disaster? Yeah, so these are all really important questions around this soil carbon that obviously we're going to pull apart through the project and really get into it. So just a bit of a summary on the project. The first thing we're doing is a Kiewa Carbon Blitz. So that's where we're sampling 31, I think it is, Charles, now, isn't it? 31 soil properties. Well, actually it's 35 because we've got the 4 demonstration farms too. So we're sampling carbon on 35 properties across the valley to get a real sense of how much carbon there is, what's the variability in carbon in different landscapes under different management. So that'll be happening. We're launching the drone next week, and there'll be a drone flying over the Kiewa Valley for a month scanning everyone's property. So if you do hear a drone at night and you wonder what it is, it's just the Kiewa Carbon Blitz drone sampling your carbon. No, I'm just kidding. Me and Charles have to come out the old-fashioned way with a corer and pull some cores. So that's the first thing. We're going to learn all about carbon across the valley. How much is there? How many millionaires there'll be in the Kiewa Valley at the end of 12 months. And then the next one is that there's a series of workshops across 6 months. So kicking off in February, we're going to have a workshop on the demonstration farms, which I'll go through in a minute. And then that will introduce you to how you sample for carbon and how we've set up the projects, etc., and what sort of eligible activities you can do during a carbon project. So yeah, getting to sort of, these will all be out in the paddock. So obviously Jessica, who's here with us tonight, she's one of those sites, but there's 3 others. And then there's demonstration farms, which I'll go over in a second. I'll show you them, including Jessica's. And then there's going to be some guests that we're going to get in. So we're going to get a contract soil corer in. We're going to get some people from the carbon companies and Dr. Greg Bender, who's a soil biology PhD and has worked in this space a lot. So just to help us really flesh out the information. And there will be a session where you'll be able to meet the carbon companies and pick their brains, and we'll get you all drunk at the pub before you meet them, and then you can sign contracts with them without knowing what you're supposed to be doing. Just kidding. And then the last one is which I forgot to put on there, so we've also got some money for some soil DNA testing. So this is pretty exciting, especially if you're a soil nerd, because this DNA lab is world leading. It's in Australia, and so it gives us a chance to measure the soil DNA or the soil microbiome to the most advanced level you can on the planet, pretty much. So yeah, we'll be doing some fun other little workshops around assessing soil health and soil biology and soil carbon as we go through. So I'll just share another little the last screen. So yeah, the 4 farms, just to give you a bit of a feel for it. The first demonstration farm is Scott and Belinda McKillops at Dedarang. They're dairy farmers, and they'll be trialling the use of gypsum and biological products on their place. So it's just a demonstration. It's only a 6-month demonstration. So we're realistic that it probably won't build carbon in 6 months, but it's a way for everyone to sort of see these farm practices and how they relate to carbon and what it involves jumping into a project. The second one is not far away. It's also in Kaganya South, just over the hill from Dedarang. And they're also a dairy farmer, but they'll be trying compost and gypsum as part of their trial. And then Trent and Sally Taylor, we're looking to use a yeoman's keyline plough to see if that can help improve root volume and therefore plant biomass and therefore more carbon. Hopefully everyone can see the logic there. Anything that grows more plant biomass, particularly root volume, is going to help you build soil carbon. That's the bottom line. And the final one there is Jessica and Tobias Brains. They're at Pongilla, and their property is a hobby farm, which is all good because it's still a landscape. It's still important for the planet. And yeah, we're going to look at what's called altering the stocking rate, duration, and intensity of grazing. So we're going to buy Jess and Tobias 500 alpacas, and they're going to plonk them in 1 hectare and move them around. Sorry, you didn't hear about that, Jess. We've decided to buy alpacas, mate, because we want some beanies for everyone for next winter as well with the Kiewa logo on it. Okay, so that's the projects, and I'll just get back to that. Yeah, so the projects will go, this is the flyer that we'll send out, or it's probably already out on Facebook and stuff, and Charles will send it through. But February, March, April, June, and May and June, we'll have projects throughout the first half of next year. So please keep your eyes out for them. And I think I've only got 1 or 2 more slides left, if I can get this to work. No, that's it. So I think I've done it. So yeah, please keep an eye out for the project, and we really welcome everyone to come along if you can't get to all the sessions, but feel free to try and get along to some of them. We might try and have some of them on a Saturday. It depends how we go. But yeah, we'll try and mix it up a bit so we can get some people that don't necessarily get time during the week. So I think at that point, I'll kind of pull it together. Hopefully I haven't missed anything too major. Charles and Shannon, let me know if I have. And yeah, open it up for some questions. If there's any questions about the project or carbon in general, yeah, then please feel free to throw it in now.
I just had a question, Dave. How you
Yes.
going?
Yeah, Jessica.
So if you did sell your carbon and then you sold your whole farm, what
Yeah.
would happen to the person that bought your carbon? Like, what the new owners would the onus be on them?
Yeah, the obligation, as I understand it, the obligation's there. So, and this is what we're going to really tease apart, because the different carbon companies have different contractual arrangements for all of this stuff. Because obviously, if you're attaching carbon to the landscape, then it sort of becomes, if you like, part of the title, and it is attached to title. Yep. Yeah. So this is one of the challenges.
Just got another question in the chat, Dave.
Yeah, no worries.
See that one?
Jill, Jill, the guys, we just sort of had we at each of the face-to-face, we had a lucky box, what's it called? A door prize. So who could get that carbon. So if we didn't really have a door prize for the online group, did we really, Shannon and Charles? But the guys will make an executive decision, Jill, because they might have a little bit of a pot of money to take a few more. So maybe they can get in touch with you. Samuel McIntosh.
Sorry, Dave, just as for the other sessions, we'll send out a big invite and information once we've got the actual dates and times all together. So
no worries.
Send that out to you, Jill.
Yeah. So Samuel, yes, you're obviously in the game, mate. So obviously we're going to cover the jargon that you're covering there, strata levels and more core samples. Yeah. So we're going to step people through that, Samuel. I think sounds like you might have already gone through it. If I've got the right person in my mind that's done a project with AgriProve or is doing one with AgriProve. Yeah. So we're just going to demystify all of that for everyone, Samuel, because everyone's sort of wondering, how many cores you take, and it does depend a bit on your landscape. Yeah. So obviously the more different variability in a landscape, the more variability soils are generally. So that's what we're going to cover in the first workshop. How you design the sampling and how you set up the plan for the soil project with CEAs and stratas. So we're going to jump into all of that. Any other questions or comments?
David, I've got one.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of the flow of income from it. So is it a lump sum? Is it flow over time?
It depends a little bit on the contractual arrangement. So AgriProve, who you'll meet, one of the carbon companies, that they've been giving part payments, and there's even companies now cooking up schemes where they prepay you and all this sort of stuff. It's a very, very dynamic early market phase. But in general, basically, the payments will arise when carbon is grown. So they have to really you have to prove that you've got carbon, otherwise who's going to buy it? But there are people trying to come into the marketplace with sort of more complex part payments and prepayment type schemes. There's a few of them starting to emerge. The whole thing's very early days market, Ian. And the other thing to be mindful of is that these carbon companies only get one shot at you. And that's why they're all being really aggressive, because it's a one-shot market. Once they've got the landholder stitched up, no one else, it's not like I can come and get your business next year. That makes sense. So they're all quite keen to get landholders signed up. And thanks, Samuel. Samuel's put in there his scale. We're going to cover that scale, and that's the thing you can see there, Samuel. So Ian, it's about it's the market's not going to disappear, but the dynamics are that these carbon companies, they want landholders because they know that if they get their signature, no one else can for 25 years. So it's like a one-shot market for them. So that's why this project, we've got this opportunity just to slow down and give you guys the information. We want those carbon companies to be involved, but we just want to slow it down so you can make an informed decision if you decide to go into it. And as you can see there from Samuel's comment on the chat, is that, the project, his size of his land probably wasn't going to be viable to make the money pay. But yes, there are different ways there's different proposals from the different companies about payments. So
so just on the payments, was there any modelling done on the type of return you can expect, subject to how much carbon you can have per acre or something, so you can compare it to sort of running livestock or something else?
So that's what we're going to do is do some modelling for you to give you some case study scenarios. So we haven't done them yet, but that's exactly what we're going to do through the project.
Thanks, Dave.
No worries. Who was next? Sorry, I missed that. Heath.
David, it's Heath here. I'm just wondering if you have a hypothesis, I guess, in terms of the project of, at the end of this or in a few years' time as to
Yeah.
what the Kiewa Valley might actually look like in terms of carbon trading. Now, I won't hold you to this because it's all going to rapidly change, but what's your gut feel, or what are we testing?
Oh, look, Heath, I really, for us, so this is an engagement project and a sort of information project. I guess the big driver will be the price of carbon on the global market. So the government has a reverse tender type market mechanism at the moment, which is already going up quite quickly. But then the global demand for carbon, if it really cranks up, then it may be that smaller sized properties in high rainfall, cool temperate areas, because this area is a high carbon potential area, so that the smaller holdings like Samuel's put there, 50 hectares, it may be that people can get a financial return if the price of carbon's really high. So it's really hard to know whether this whole carbon market will become this mature global product, if you like. Without that, then I guess people will be changing more for just agronomic reasons, like trying to improve their soil health, to minimize their fertilizers and things. So I think that drive is just as important, in my experience doing extension for a fair while. A lot of people just want to improve their soil health because it helps the farm business and water quality or just fertilizer efficiency. So I think that's just as much a driver as carbon. But if the carbon price really gets high, like say $200 a ton, then that could really, really well influence people, changing what they're doing. And the big elephant in the room is above ground carbon too, like standing vegetation, trees and shrubs. So, again, if all of this, there's already, I know personally farmers that are buying properties just for carbon projects, like large properties in other areas of Australia, and they're buying their property not to run sheep or whatever, actually for their carbon potential. So, this is already starting to happen, but it will really go crazy. And if rural real estate is already crazy enough, but if it gets even worse, then people could be buying it just for carbon potential. Guess if that makes sense. So it's pretty hard for me to crystal ball. I do know that soil health is a really strongly emerging area that people are keen to engage with, wherever they sit on the soil carbon and the environment sort of. Yeah.
Another one.
No worries. Yeah, Raphael's. Are there real examples in our area of the range of carbon increases achieved and what the main method? Yeah, so Raphael, I guess this is the thing at the moment. There has been quite a lot of studies done on soil carbon over many decades around Australia. I guess it's about looking at doing before and after studies, but there are studies in temperate grazing, so I'll use that term to cover the higher rainfall southeastern Australia temperate grazing areas, which covers the Kiewa Valley, and seeing changes in carbon over 5 to 7 year periods. So yes, we know that carbon can grow, and we know that grass type can influence it, but in particularly the grazing system. So yes, changing to a more planned rotational grazing where you allow perennial grasses to recover and therefore build root volume, resilience of their root system, definitely influences soil carbon status. So there's also been quite a lot of work done recently on subtropical pastures, which is a little bit outside the zone, but not very far. And there's been quite a lot of work done on how influential they can be on them. So temperate grasses, C3 grasses and C4 grasses, there has been quite a lot of work done. And in fact, if you look at the traditional farming systems in Australia pre-1960s, 1970s, particularly in the sheep wheat belt or the cropping zone, almost everyone had a pasture phase and a cropping phase on their property. So they were in rotation, and that was because the pasture phase was a soil building phase. So that was actually the early adoption. The early 20th century adaptation farming system was to have a mixed farm with some pastures, and because pastures were known to rebuild soil organic matter, soil structure, soil function, and then you'd put them into a cropping phase and change over. So yes, there has been some studies, but this is partly what we're doing here, is to try and get down to the more local level. And I've actually got a project going at the moment for looking at one whole property. We're doing carbon surveys across a whole property near Holbrook. Yeah, so Samuel, you can get a change in, Samuel's got in there the best recovery time, 12 to 14 months. I'm not sure if you're talking about pastures to recover or carbon levels to recover. Generally, carbon, there is a little bit of a spike in the labile carbon, usually, Samuel, in the first year to 2 years, but that longer term humus, the perennial grass, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it does depend on rainfall and how you're grazing them and the condition of the paddock beforehand, Samuel. Yeah, so you will see paddocks sort of respond a bit quicker than that, but depends how flogged out it is, really. So yeah. Any other questions or comments? So yeah, we're glad everyone could make it in, and we hope that you can catch one or more of the sessions face to face when they pop up. And so I guess I might pull it up at that point, Charles. It doesn't look like anyone else is throwing me any curly ones. Yeah, thanks everyone for being a part of it. And yeah, we're going to keep everyone up to date at all the time. And we'll be putting up our carbon numbers across the valley as we measure them over the next month to 2 months. So yeah, please keep following us along on the socials.
Thanks for that, Dave. Thanks everyone again for coming up tonight. Yeah, like we said, we'll send out all the information across all our platforms over the next few weeks with all the dates and times for all those sessions. And tomorrow I'll shoot through in the morning just a little feedback form for tonight. If you got a spare couple of minutes just to do that over the next few days. So, and yeah, if you got any further questions, there'll be a little comment section on that if you think of something from now till then. So we'll all be in touch, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you at some of the sessions next year, and the world might be a safer, better place. Hopefully by February next year. So yeah, I'd love to see you all come along. And thanks again for tonight, everyone. Thanks, Dave, and thanks.
No worries. Thanks, everyone. We look forward to catching up with you.
Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Hey, mate, let me start recording.
Hang on.